The day Mrs. Tanner mocked Amira Williams for claiming her father was a military helicopter pilot, something broke in the 8-year-old's eyes. "That's quite the imagination," the teacher had sneered, unleashing classroom laughter that haunted Amira for weeks. No one believed her. Not the counselor who suggested therapy, not the CPS worker who questioned her mother's parenting. They saw only what they expected, a black child spinning fantasies for attention. But outside Meadowridge Elementary, a man in a black SUV watched and waited, hunting for classified information Amira unknowingly carried in her memory. When career day arrived and parents filled the auditorium, the building began to shake. Windows rattled, papers flew. And as a matte black stealth helicopter descended over the playground, Captain Amira Williams prepared to show everyone, especially Mrs. Tanner, that sometimes the most dangerous mistake is refusing to believe a child when she speaks the truth. Just before we get back to it, I'd love to know where you're watching from today. And if you're enjoying these stories, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow's special episode is one you definitely don't want to miss. Sunshine streamed through the windows of Mrs. Tanner's third-grade classroom at Meadowridge Elementary. The children buzzed with excitement as they settled into their seats for the start of Parent Career Week. Each day this week, students would take turns standing in front of their classmates to share what their parents did for a living. "All right, everyone," Mrs. Tanner announced, clapping her hands together twice. "Let's begin our sharing time. Who would like to go first?" Several eager hands shot up. Mrs. Tanner called on Tommy Anderson first. The freckle-faced boy bounded to the front of the classroom, practically bouncing on his toes. "My mom's a dentist," Tommy declared proudly. "She fixes people's teeth and makes them smile again. She even has her own office with her name on the door." Mrs. Tanner nodded approvingly. "That's wonderful, Tommy. Dentists help keep us healthy. Thank you for sharing." Next came Sophia Wilson, whose father owned the local hardware store. Then Jason Evans, whose mother was an accountant. One by one, the children shared their parents' occupations, each receiving a warm smile and words of encouragement from Mrs. Tanner. Near the back of the classroom sat Amira Williams. Unlike many of her classmates, she wasn't waving her hand frantically in the air. Instead, she sat quietly, her dark eyes fixed on the teacher, waiting patiently for her turn. When most of the other students had shared, Amira finally raised her hand. "Yes, Amira?" Mrs. Tanner said, her voice containing just a hint less enthusiasm than it had for the other children. Amira stood up and walked to the front of the room. She was smaller than most of her classmates, with tight curly hair pulled back in 2 neat puffs, secured with yellow ribbons that matched her cardigan. Though quiet by nature, there was a confidence in her posture as she faced the class. "My dad's a pilot," she began, her voice clear and steady. "He flies helicopters, sometimes big ones, for the military." Mrs. Tanner paused, her eyebrows rising slightly. She let out a small, sarcastic chuckle. "That's quite the story, Amira." Amira's smile faltered, confusion flickering across her face. "It's not a story, Mrs. Tanner. It's his job." Before Mrs. Tanner could respond, Billy Parker began making loud helicopter noises, his arms outstretched like rotor blades. "Whoop, whoop, whoop! Coming in for landing, Captain Williams." "Sure," Rachel Turner said with an eye roll, "and my dad's Batman." Laughter erupted across the classroom. Amira stood frozen at the front, her small hands clasped tightly together. She tried to maintain her smile, but her eyes betrayed her hurt. Mrs. Tanner did nothing to stop the laughter. In fact, the corner of her mouth twitched upward slightly before she finally raised her hand for quiet. "That's a nice imagination, Amira," Mrs. Tanner said, her voice dripping with condescension. "But let's focus on real jobs. You could say your mom's a nurse, right?" Amira's eyes welled with tears. "But my dad is a pilot, he really is." "That's enough now," Mrs. Tanner said, motioning for Amira to return to her seat. "Let's move on to someone else." As Amira walked back to her desk, head down, she didn't notice the one set of eyes that followed her sympathetically. Jace Bennett, a thin boy with glasses too big for his face, watched her from his corner seat. He opened his mouth as if to say something, but then closed it again, his own insecurities silencing him. Later that day, Mrs. Tanner lounged in the teacher's break room, coffee mug in hand as she chatted with Mrs. Green, the fourth-grade teacher. "You won't believe what Amira Williams said today," Mrs. Tanner said, rolling her eyes. "She told the entire class her father flies military helicopters." Mrs. Green raised an eyebrow. "The quiet one, with the single mom?" "Exactly," Mrs. Tanner nodded. "That child is always trying to seem more important than she is. Her kind does that." She took a sip of her coffee. "Making up stories for attention." Neither teacher noticed the janitor, Mr. Cleven, pausing briefly by the doorway, his weathered face frowning slightly at their conversation before he continued pushing his cart down the hallway. During recess, Amira sat alone on a bench at the edge of the playground. While other children ran and played, she hunched over a small notepad, carefully drawing the outline of a helicopter. She added details with precision: rotor blades, windows, landing skids. Jace hovered nearby, watching her draw. He wanted to approach, to tell her he believed her, but his stutter always seemed worst around new people. So he stayed back, silently, observing as she pressed a sticky note into her notebook and continued drawing. When the final bell rang, Amira packed up her belongings and began her walk home. Unlike most children who left in groups or were picked up by parents, Amira walked alone, her yellow backpack seeming too large for her small frame. She dragged her feet slightly, in no hurry to reach her destination. As she passed the park, 2 blocks from school, she failed to notice a dark SUV parked along the sidewalk. Inside sat a man wearing sunglasses, his attention fixed on the elementary school in the distance. When Amira walked by, his head turned slightly, tracking her movement. He made a note in a small black notebook before starting the engine and driving slowly in the opposite direction. Amira arrived home to find her mother, Nadine, rushing around the kitchen in scrubs, preparing a quick dinner before her night shift at the hospital. "There's my girl," Nadine said warmly, pausing to kiss Amira's forehead. "How was school today, baby?" Amira dropped her backpack on a kitchen chair and forced a smile. "It was fine." Nadine studied her daughter's face for a moment, sensing something. Wasn't right, but the timer on the oven beeped, pulling her attention away. "I made your favorite mac and cheese. I've got to leave in 20 minutes, but Mrs. Taylor from next door will check on you before bedtime, okay?" Amira nodded, the practiced routine of a child who understood her mother's demanding work schedule. After dinner and once her mother had left for her shift, Amira retreated to her bedroom. It was a small but cozy space, with walls painted sky blue, her father's choice when she was just a baby. From beneath her bed, Amira pulled out a shoebox decorated with stickers of clouds and airplanes. She opened it carefully as if handling precious treasure. Inside lay the evidence of her truth: photographs of a handsome black man in military uniform standing beside various helicopters, colorful flight patches with emblems and squadron numbers, and a folded letter on official-looking stationery that read, "From the cockpit, love, Dad." Amira ran her fingers over the items, tears finally spilling onto her cheeks. She hadn't lied. She would never lie about her father. Why didn't they believe her? That night, as she lay in bed waiting for sleep, Amira reached for her most prized possession, a toy walkie-talkie her father had given her before his last deployment. It didn't actually work, but that didn't matter. It was their special connection. She pressed the plastic button and whispered into it, "Come back soon, Daddy. They don't believe me." Then she closed her eyes, imagining her words traveling across oceans and deserts, finding her father wherever he might be, letting him know she was waiting. In her dreams that night, Amira saw her father clearly. The memory was from nearly a year ago, one of the last times he'd been home. Captain Elijah Williams sat on the edge of her bed, still in his flight suit, having come straight from the base to tuck her in. "Do you fly high enough to touch the stars?" Amira had asked, her eyes heavy with sleep. Elijah smiled, his hand gently, stroking her hair. "Almost, baby girl. Almost." "Promise you'll come back," she murmured. "I'll always come back," he whispered. "Always." Amira woke with a start, the dream memory so vivid she could almost smell her father's cologne, a mix of sandalwood and something uniquely him. Her digital clock glowed 2:17 a.m. The house was silent, except for the occasional creak of settling wood. Carefully, Amira slipped out of bed and padded down the hallway. In the kitchen drawer, beneath a stack of takeout menus, was her mother's emergency satellite phone, the special one they were only supposed to use when absolutely necessary. Amira knew the number by heart. She'd watched her mother dial it countless times. Her small fingers punched in the sequence of numbers, and she waited, heart racing, as the strange series of tones indicated the secure line connecting. 1 ring, 2 rings, 3. Security protocol, Alpha 9 or 6 identify. The voice was formal, clipped. "It's Amira," she whispered. "Amira Williams. I need to talk to my daddy." A pause, then some muffled voices. Finally, "Stand by." Minutes passed before she heard his voice. "Starlight? Is that you?" Tears welled in her eyes at the sound of her nickname. "Daddy?" They laughed. "At school. They didn't believe me when I said what you do." His voice remained measured, calm, but there was an edge to it she couldn't quite read. "I'm sorry, baby girl, people don't always understand jobs like mine. When are you coming home?" Another pause. "Soon. I promise. But Amira, you shouldn't be using this phone unless it's an emergency." "This is an emergency," she insisted. "To my heart." She heard a soft chuckle. Then his voice grew serious again. "I love you, Starlight. I have to go now. Be brave for me, okay?" "Okay, Daddy. I love..." But the line had already gone dead. The next morning, Nadine noticed immediately that her satellite phone had been moved. As she prepared breakfast, she watched Amira picking at her cereal, dark circles under her young eyes. "Did you use the emergency phone last night?" Nadine asked, keeping her voice gentle. Amira nodded without looking up. Nadine sighed, sitting down across from her daughter. "Sweetie, I know you miss him, I do too, but that phone is only for real emergencies." "I needed to hear him," Amira mumbled. Nadine reached across the table and squeezed Amira's hand. "I understand, but he's deep in assignment right now. The last message I got was weeks ago." She didn't add that this was the longest Elijah had ever gone without contacting them, or that her own worry was growing by the day. At school, Amira tried to stay invisible, still stinging from yesterday's humiliation. But during the staff meeting before classes began, Mrs. Tanner was making sure Amira remained a topic of discussion. "I'm concerned about Amira Williams," she said to the school counselor, Mr. Patterson. "She's exhibiting signs of behavioral exaggeration, making up elaborate stories about her father." Her voice lowered. "It might be worth monitoring. Single-parent household, you know. She might be creating an imaginary father figure to compensate." Mr. Patterson made a note in his file, though he looked less convinced than Mrs. Tanner would have liked. That afternoon, as the children were being dismissed, Amira spotted something that made her freeze momentarily at the school entrance. The same black SUV she'd glimpsed yesterday was now parked directly across from the school. Though she couldn't see through its tinted windows, something about its presence sent a chill through her small body. She changed her usual route home, cutting through the playground and taking the path behind the community center. Once she was certain no one was following, she hurried the rest of the way home. What Amira couldn't see was what was happening inside that SUV. A man with close-cropped hair and cold eyes studied a tablet displaying encrypted photographs. Amira's school ID, pictures of Nadine leaving the hospital after her shift, satellite images showing the layout of Meadowridge Elementary. He spoke quietly into a phone, his words in a language that would have been unfamiliar to most Americans. Target confirmed, routine established, waiting for extraction orders. That evening, Nadine's younger sister Lita came over for dinner. After Amira went to bed, the sisters sat in the living room, wine glasses in hand. "Have you heard anything?" Lita asked, her voice low. Nadine shook her head. "Nothing concrete in almost a month." Lita set her glass down carefully. "Nadine, you need to consider the possibilities. You're sure Elijah's still in service? People vanish all the time from those secret ops." "He wouldn't leave us," Nadine said firmly, though there was a flicker of uncertainty in her eyes. "I'm not saying he left willingly. Lita replied gently. I'm saying there are risks in his line of work. Risks you've always known about. Nadine took a long sip of wine. He promised Amira he'd always come back. He wouldn't break that promise unless... She couldn't finish the sentence. Lita reached for her sister's hand. Have you tried contacting his commanding officer again? They won't tell me anything. Classified mission. Need to know basis. Nadine's frustration was evident. And now Amira's teacher thinks she's making him up completely. What? That's ridiculous. Apparently, Amira told her class that her dad flies helicopters for the military, and this woman basically called her a liar in front of everyone. Lita's eyes narrowed. Oh, hell no. You need to go down there and set that woman straight. With E. What proof? Nadine sighed. Most of Elijah's missions are undocumented. I have pictures, sure, but that doesn't prove he's still active duty or even alive. Her voice broke on the last word. Unknown to both women, Amira sat huddled at the top of the stairs, listening to every word, her small heart pounding with fear. The next day during recess, Amira found a quiet corner of the playground and began to draw with renewed purpose. This time, she created a scene of a giant helicopter hovering above her school, a rope ladder dangling down to where a small figure, clearly meant to be herself, waited with arms outstretched. She was so absorbed in her drawing that she didn't notice Jace until he was standing right beside her. Without a word, he sat down and pulled out a box of crayons from his pocket. He selected a metallic silver one and carefully drew what looked like a badge or emblem next to the helicopter. Above it, in neat block letters, he wrote, Rescue. Amira looked at him in surprise. You believe me? Jace nodded, pushing his glasses up his nose. My uncle was in the Air Force, he managed, his stutter less pronounced than usual. Your D-Dad sounds like him. It was the first time anyone at school had shown her kindness since career week began, and Amira felt a warm spark of friendship ignite between them. The following day, Amira brought something special to class, a small, detailed model of an Apache helicopter that her father had given her. During show and tell, she placed it carefully on her desk. Mrs. Tanner noticed it immediately. With a tight smile that didn't reach her eyes, she picked up the model and held it for the class to see. Look, everyone, she said with exaggerated enthusiasm. See, class? This is how far imagination can take you. Amira has even brought a toy to match her story. Several children giggled. Amira's face burned with shame, but she kept her chin up. It's not a toy, she said quietly but firmly. It's a scale model. My dad showed me all the parts. Mrs. Tanner placed the helicopter back on Amira's desk with a dismissive pat. Yes, dear. Very creative. That afternoon, as Nadine sorted through the mail after work, she found an envelope with no return address. Inside was a photograph that made her blood run cold. Amira playing outside their home, taken from a high angle, as if from a rooftop or tree. Along with it was a typed note. We're watching. He can't hide forever. Nadine's hands shook as she immediately reached for her phone to call the police, but as her finger hovered over the dial button, doubt crept in. What if this was related to Elijah's work? Involving local authorities could potentially make things worse. She needed to be smart about this. Instead, she called the secure number she used for emergencies related to Elijah. When the operator answered, Nadine spoke in a hushed, urgent tone. This is Nadine Williams, wife of Captain Elijah Williams. We've received a threat. I need to speak with someone in command immediately. As night fell, Amira lay in bed clutching her walkie-talkie, unaware of the danger circling ever closer to her family. In the darkness, she whispered her nightly message. Daddy, if you can hear me, I still believe in you, even if no one else does. Miles away, in an undisclosed location, Captain Elijah Williams stood before a wall of surveillance monitors, his face illuminated by their blue glow. On one screen, he could see his home, the lights just going out as his family prepared for sleep. His expression hardened as an aide approached with a folder marked Classified. Sir, we've intercepted communications. They've located your family. Elijah took the folder, his decision already made. "Prepare the extraction team. It's time to bring them home." The classroom buzzed with excitement as Mrs. Tanner tapped her pointer against the whiteboard to get everyone's attention. Behind her, written in neat purple marker, were the words, "Hero in the Classroom Week." "Listen up, everyone," she announced, her voice carrying across the room. "Next week is going to be very special. Each of you will bring a parent or guardian to speak about their job and how they contribute to our community." The third graders whispered excitedly to each other. Tommy Anderson nudged his friend and whispered that his mom was going to bring real dental tools to show the class. Rachel, Turner was already planning how her accountant father would make math seem cool. "You'll need to have these permission slips signed," Mrs. Tanner continued, holding up a stack of bright yellow papers. "Make sure your parent or guardian can commit to the date assigned. No last-minute cancellations, please." As she moved between the rows distributing the forms, Amira sat up straighter in her seat. Without hesitation, her hand shot into the air. "Yes, Amira?" Mrs. Tanner's tone cooled noticeably. "My dad's coming," Amira said with quiet confidence, her eyes shining. "He can show pictures of his helicopter." The classroom went silent. Mrs. Tanner's lips pressed into a thin line before curving into a condescending smile. "Well," she said, drawing out the word, "we'll pencil him in if he exists." Several children giggled. Jace, sitting 2 rows over, looked down at his desk, his face flushed with second-hand embarrassment. Mrs. Tanner placed a permission slip on Amira's desk. "I'll need your mother's signature by Friday." The emphasis on mothers was subtle, but unmistakable. Later that morning, Amira was surprised when Mr. Patterson, the school counselor, appeared at the classroom door and asked to speak with her. She followed him down the hallway to his office, a small room with motivational posters and a bookshelf full of colorful titles about feelings. "Have a seat, Amira," he said kindly, gesturing to a chair across from his desk. "I just wanted to check in with you. How are things going?" Amira shrugged. "Fine. Mrs. Tanner mentioned you've been talking about your dad being a helicopter pilot." "He is," Amira said firmly. Mr. Patterson leaned forward slightly. "Amira, sometimes when we miss someone very much, or when we wish for something to be true, our minds can make it seem real to us. Is your dad someone real, or someone you wish was real?" Amira's eyes widened with indignation. "He's real. His name is Elijah Williams. He flies Black Hawk helicopters. He has medals." Mr. Patterson made a note on his pad. "And when was the last time you saw your dad, Amira?" She hesitated, trying to remember exactly. "Before school started, last summer." "That's quite a while ago," he said softly. "Do you have pictures of him at home?" "Yes, lots of them. And his patches and letters." Mr. Patterson nodded, his expression sympathetic in a way that made Amira's stomach twist. He didn't believe her either. None of them did. That evening, Nadine was preparing dinner when her phone rang. Seeing the school's number, she answered immediately, always alert for any issues involving Amira. "Ms. Williams? This is Principal Winters from Meadowridge Elementary." "Is everything okay with Amira?" Nadine asked, instantly concerned. "She's fine physically, but we'd like to discuss some concerns about her emotional well-being. Mrs. Tanner and Mr. Patterson have noted that Amira has been creating elaborate stories about her father being a military helicopter pilot." Nadine nearly dropped the phone. "Excuse me?" "We're concerned about these fantasies and would like to recommend a psychological screening. It's not uncommon for children from single-parent households to—" "Single-parent?" Nadine interrupted, her voice rising. "My husband is on active duty. He's a captain in the Army assigned to a classified unit. Just because he's deployed doesn't mean he doesn't exist." There was an uncomfortable pause on the line. "I see," Principal Winters said, his tone suggesting he didn't believe her either. "Well, perhaps you could provide some documentation of his service, just to help us better support Amira." Nadine gripped the counter, fighting to keep her composure. "I'll be at the school tomorrow morning. We can discuss this in person." She hung up before she said something she might regret. The next day, Amira noticed the black SUV had moved closer. It was now parked right outside the school gate, its engine running. As she walked to the building, she felt eyes following her. The man inside lifted what looked like a small camera and pointed it in her direction. He then typed something on a laptop beside him before pulling away from the curb. What Amira couldn't see was the email being sent from that vehicle. Target located, daily pattern confirmed, awaiting extraction orders. During recess, Amira tried to stay inconspicuous, keeping to the edges of the playground. But her brief moment of peace was shattered when Kyle Brooks approached with a few of his friends. "Hey, look, it's Helicopter Girl," he called out loud enough for others to hear. "Where's your imaginary dad today? Flying to the moon?" The boys laughed. Amira clutched her notebook tighter against her chest and tried to walk away. "Leave her." "Alone," came a quiet voice behind her. Jace had appeared, his thin shoulders squared despite his obvious nervousness. "Mind your own business, stutter boy," Kyle sneered, giving Jace a hard shove that sent him sprawling onto the asphalt. Mrs. Tanner, supervising recess from nearby, saw the entire exchange, but merely turned away, pretending to be occupied with another group of children. Amira helped Jace to his feet, noticing the scrape on his palm from the fall. "Thanks," she whispered. "You didn't have to do that." I know what it's like when nobody believes you," Jace replied, wiping his injured hand on his jeans. Later that afternoon, as Amira was retrieving her backpack from her cubby, she noticed Mr. Cleven mopping the hallway floor nearby. He was humming softly to himself, a tune she didn't recognize. When she walked past him toward the exit, he paused in his work. "That's a nice drawing," he said, nodding toward the folder she was carrying, which had her helicopter sketch visible on the cover. Amira stopped, surprised by the friendly comment. "Thank you." "Your dad flies these?" he asked casually. But there was something in his eyes, a knowing look. Amira nodded cautiously. Mr. Cleven glanced around to make sure no one was within earshot, then lowered his voice. "Tell him Cleven still owes him a beer from Kandahar." Before Amira could respond, Mr. Cleven resumed mopping, acting as if the exchange had never happened. She stood frozen for a moment, then hurried outside, her mind racing. Someone believed her. Someone knew her father. What Amira didn't know was that behind closed doors the school counselor was making a call to Child Protective Services. Mr. Patterson sat at his desk, phone to his ear, flipping through notes from his session with Amira. "Yes, I'd like to report a concerning situation," he said, his voice professional and measured. "We have a student, Amira Williams, who appears to be living in a fantasy environment. Her mother is enabling elaborate falsehoods about a military father, who may not exist." He paused, listening to the person on the other end. No signs of physical neglect, but the psychological implications are troubling. The mother works night shifts as a nurse, leaving the child alone frequently. And there's this elaborate fantasy structure that's being reinforced at home. Another pause. "Yes, I understand. Thank you." He hung up, satisfied that he'd done his duty, never considering the real damage his assumptions might cause. That same afternoon, Nadine took a rare day off from work to drive to Fort Meade, where Elijah had been based before his current assignment. The security guard at the entrance checked her military spouse ID and directed her to the administration building. After an hour of being passed from one officer to another, Nadine finally sat across from Major Lewis, who had worked with Elijah in the past. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Williams," he said, looking genuinely uncomfortable. "Captain Williams's current assignment is classified at a level I don't have access to." "I understand that," Nadine said, struggling to keep her frustration in check. "I'm not asking for mission details. I just need confirmation that he's on active duty. His daughter is being humiliated at school because they don't believe her father exists." Major Lewis's expression softened slightly. "I wish I could help you, but Captain Williams's clearance level has changed. Even his status is need to know at this point." "Need to know?" Nadine repeated incredulously. "I'm his wife." "I understand your frustration, ma'am, but these protocols exist for a reason." He slid a business card across the desk. "This is the number for the Family Support Office. They may be able to provide you with some resources." Nadine took the card automatically, but the sinking feeling in her stomach told her it would be useless. As she walked back to her car, red flags were rising in her mind. Something wasn't right. Elijah's missions had always been classified, but never to the point where she couldn't even confirm his deployment status. Back at school, the final bell had rung. As children streamed toward the exits, Amira lingered in the hallway, pretending to tie her shoe while actually listening to Mrs. Tanner speaking with the music teacher outside the classroom door. "The child's clearly disturbed," Mrs. Tanner was saying, her voice low but not low enough. "These people always reach for glory, because they have so little of it." The words hit Amira like a physical blow. She'd suspected Mrs. Tanner didn't like her, but the naked contempt in the woman's voice confirmed it. Tears sprang to her eyes as she stood up abruptly, bumping into the wall and knocking down her own artwork that had been pinned there. Without stopping to pick it up, Amira ran down the hallway and out the main doors, leaving behind her crumpled helicopter drawing on the floor. After the hallway emptied, Jace emerged from the water fountain alcove where he'd been hiding. He'd heard everything Mrs. Tanner said and had seen Amira flee. Slowly, he approached the fallen drawing, kneeling to pick it up. The paper was creased and slightly torn, but the image was still clear, a detailed sketch of a helicopter hovering over what looked like a burning building. In the helicopter doorway stood a man in uniform, reaching down toward a small figure below. Across the bottom, in Amira's careful handwriting, were the words, "You said you'd protect me." Jace carefully smoothed out the drawing and folded it, tucking it into his pocket before heading home. That evening, as Nadine was helping Amira with homework at their kitchen table, a sharp knock at the door startled them both. Nadine peered through the peephole to see two official-looking people, a woman in a business suit and a man with a clipboard. "Ms. Williams," the woman said when Nadine opened the door. "I'm Angela Morris from Child Protective Services. This is my colleague, Tom Watson. We need to speak with you regarding a report we've received concerning your daughter, Amira." Nadine felt the blood drain from her face. "What report?" "May we come in?" Angela asked, her tone making it clear it wasn't really a question. Once seated in the living room, Angela explained, "We've received information that Amira is being coached to lie about her family situation and may be left alone at night regularly." "That's ridiculous," Nadine said, her voice rising. "Who filed this report?" "We're not at liberty to disclose that information," Tom replied, making notes on his clipboard. "But we need to assess Amira's living conditions and interview her separately." Nadine stood up, anger flashing in her eyes. "This is because my child said her father flies a helicopter, because a teacher decided my husband can't possibly exist?" Angela remained calm. "We're just following protocol based on the report we received. If everything is as you say, you have nothing to worry about." "I want to see your credentials again," Nadine demanded, "and I want your supervisor's name and number." While Tom conducted a walkthrough of the apartment, Angela interviewed Amira in her bedroom. Nadine paced the hallway, feeling powerless and violated. After nearly 2 hours of questioning and inspection, Angela delivered their verdict. "Based on our initial assessment, we're recommending Amira be placed in temporary mental health observation overnight." "What?" Nadine nearly shouted. "You can't take my daughter." "Ms. Williams, this is a voluntary procedure at this point," Angela explained with practiced patience. "But if you refuse, we'll be forced to seek an emergency court order based on concerns about psychological manipulation and possible neglect." "This is insane," Nadine whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Mom!" Amira appeared in the hallway, her eyes wide with fear. "What's happening?" Nadine pulled her daughter close. "Nothing, baby. Just a misunderstanding we're going to fix." She looked up at the CPS workers with determination. "I'm calling a lawyer right now." "That's your right," Angela acknowledged. "But the observation period would give you time to gather whatever documentation you need to address these concerns. It's just overnight at Children's Behavioral Health." Trapped and knowing that fighting could make things worse, Nadine reluctantly agreed to the voluntary observation, promising Amira she would pick her up first thing in the morning with proof of everything. After Nadine left with Amira and the CPS workers, the house sat empty and dark for several hours. Shortly after midnight, a shadow moved across the front yard. The man from the SUV approached the back door. expertly picking the lock with military-grade tools. Once inside, he moved with practiced efficiency, searching methodically through each room. When he reached Amira's bedroom, he began examining everything, looking under the mattress, inside books, behind picture frames, behind a well-loved teddy bear on the shelf. His fingers found what he was looking for. A small, secure USB drive hidden in the bear's stuffing. He pocketed it with a satisfied smile. As he prepared to exit through the back door, a floorboard creaked behind him. Before he could turn, something struck him in the back, a powerful electric shock that sent him crumpling to the floor. A shadowy figure bent over him, retrieving the USB drive from his pocket. "Not tonight, Victor," the newcomer whispered, his American accent tinged with something harder to place. After securing the intruder with zip ties, the mysterious figure slipped out the way he had come in, taking the USB drive with him. At the hospital, Amira sat on the edge of a narrow bed in a sterile room that tried too hard to look cheerful with its bright yellow walls and cartoon decals. A child psychologist named Dr. Freeman sat across from her, clipboard in hand. "Amira, I'd like to talk about your father," she said gently. "Can you tell me about him?" Amira stared at her knees, refusing to speak. She'd answered these questions too many times already. "It's okay if you made him up," Dr. Freeman continued. "Sometimes we create stories to help us feel better." Amira's head snapped up, her eyes blazing. "He's the only real thing," she whispered fiercely. "You just can't see him yet." Dr. Freeman made a note, her expression neutral. "And why can't we see him? Because he's saving people, important people, and bad people want to stop him." "I see," Dr. Freeman murmured, writing something else down. "And these bad people, are they after you too?" Amira thought about the black SUV, about the way her mother's hands shook when she checked the locks at night. She thought about Mr. Cleven's knowing look in the man who had broken into their home. Yes, she had seen him from her hospital window, had somehow known what was happening. But she said nothing. They wouldn't believe her anyway. Meanwhile, Nadine had returned home to find her back door ajar. Heart pounding, she grabbed a kitchen knife and cautiously entered, immediately dialing 911 when she saw the signs of intrusion. The police arrived quickly, finding the intruder still unconscious and bound in the living room. "Ma'am, do you know this man?" one officer asked as his partner handcuffed the still groggy burglar. Nadine shook her head, but there was something familiar about him, something in his tactical clothing and military-style haircut that reminded her of Elijah's unit. As the police were leading the man away, Nadine's phone rang. The screen showed unknown caller. "Hello?" she answered cautiously. "You're in danger," a scrambled, distorted voice replied. "He's not just a pilot, and they're coming for his daughter." "Who are you?" Nadine screamed into the phone. "What do you know about my husband?" The line went dead. After the police finally left, Nadine began her own thorough search of the house, looking for anything that might have been disturbed or taken. In Amira's room, she noticed the teddy bear lying on the floor instead of in its usual place on the shelf. Something about it triggered a memory. Elijah tucking something inside the bear the last time he was home, whispering to Amira that it was their special secret. Frantic now, Nadine checked the bear, finding the small slit in its back where something had clearly been removed. Whatever Elijah had hidden there was gone. Returning to her own bedroom, Nadine pulled books from the shelf, searching for anything Elijah might have left behind. Her hand paused on a worn copy of The Little Prince, Elijah's favorite book to read to Amira. As she pulled it down, she noticed it felt oddly heavy. Opening it, she found the inside had been hollowed out, containing a second flash drive. With shaking hands, she took it to her laptop. The drive contained dozens of encrypted files, most of which she couldn't open, but a few were accessible. Satellite images marked with foreign emblems, mission briefing headers with most details, redacted, and a folder labeled simply Skylight. Inside was a single document containing a list of coordinates and dates. Nadine sat back, her mind racing. Whatever Elijah was involved in went far beyond piloting helicopters. And somehow, Amira was connected to it. At the observation facility, Amira lay awake, staring at the ceiling. The night nurse had checked on her an hour ago, noting her refusal to sleep. In the quiet darkness, Amira whispered to herself, a mantra, of sorts. He's real. He's coming. He promised. 3,000 miles away in an underground hangar that didn't officially exist, Captain Elijah Williams stood before a stealth helicopter, its matte black surface absorbing the light around it. His commanding officer, Colonel Reeves, approached with a tablet displaying Amira's hospital admission records. "They found your daughter," Reeves said grimly. "Extraction protocol must begin. You have 48 hours." Elijah nodded, his expression hardening, as he studied the tactical map on the screen before him. "I'm bringing her home," he said, his voice leaving no room for doubt. "Both of them." "The mission," Reeves began, "is secondary to my family's safety," Elijah finished. "Victor's team made their move. Now I make mine." As dawn broke over the city, Amira watched from her hospital window as the sky lightened from black to deep blue. Somewhere out there, she knew her father was coming. Despite what everyone said, despite the doubt that had begun to creep into even her young heart, she held onto that belief, because Elijah Williams had made a promise. And as far as Amira knew, her father had never broken a promise. Back at home, Nadine was frantically gathering documents: Elijah's military ID, their marriage certificate, photographs, anything that would prove to CPS that she wasn't delusional, that her husband existed. But as she worked, a new fear was taking hold. If Elijah was involved in something dangerous enough to warrant break-ins and threats, what would happen when she brought attention to him? Her phone chimed with a text from an unknown number. "Trust no one at the school. Meet me at the veterans shelter at noon. C." Nadine stared at the message. C. Could it be the janitor Amira had mentioned? Cleven? Whoever it was, Nadine was running out of options. If this mysterious C knew something about Elijah, she had no choice but to meet him. But first, she needed to get her daughter back. As she gathered her keys and purse, Nadine glanced at the copy of The Little Prince on her nightstand. On impulse, she grabbed it, tucking it into her bag before heading out to reclaim Amira and restore the truth about their family, a truth that was becoming more complicated and dangerous by the hour. The underground hangar hummed with activity as Captain Elijah Williams zipped up his elite stealth flight gear. Unlike standard military issue, this suit was matte black, with no insignia or identifiable markings, the uniform of a ghost. Around him, a small team of specialists prepared equipment, checking comm systems and loading gear into the helicopter's cargo bay. Colonel Reeves approached, a tablet tucked under his arm and concern etched in the lines of his weathered face. He handed Elijah a sealed mission dossier labeled Operation Skylight, Civilian Extraction. "This crosses several lines, Captain," Reeves said quietly, making sure they weren't overheard. "Using military resources for a personal extraction is against protocol." Elijah accepted the dossier, his expression betraying nothing. "With all due respect, sir, my family's safety was guaranteed when I accepted this assignment," Reeves sighed. "I'm not arguing that point, but the timing couldn't be worse. We're 3 days away from completing the information transfer. Then we'll have to accelerate the timeline." Elijah's tone left no room for debate. "They've located Amira. Victor's people don't take prisoners, especially child witnesses." The colonel nodded reluctantly. "You're not just a father, Elijah. You're the only one who can get her out." He checked his watch. "The stealth chopper is prepped for departure. In 30 minutes, your ground team will make contact at the rally point." As Elijah studied the mission briefing, his mind was split between the tactical considerations of the extraction and thoughts of his daughter's face, the way her eyes lit up whenever he told her bedtime stories about the stars. Across town, Nadine sat at her kitchen table, her laptop open before her. She'd spent hours trying to access more of the encrypted files on the flash drive from The Little Prince. Most remained locked behind security protocols she couldn't breach, but fragments had begun to emerge, glimpses into Elijah's secret world. A video clip played on her screen. Elijah in what appeared to be the cargo hold of a helicopter. His expression, tense as the camera shook violently. Gunfire could be heard in the background. The footage cut to an aerial view of a compound in flames, then to Elijah assisting wounded civilians into the aircraft. Just before the clip ended, a photograph flashed on screen. Nadine and Amira standing in front of their home, smiling. Static. Replaced the image, followed by code words Nadine didn't understand. She sat back, her coffee long forgotten and cold. This wasn't just any mission. Whatever Elijah was involved in, it went far beyond standard military operations. The evidence suggested some kind of high-risk extraction work, rescuing people from dangerous situations that officially didn't exist. Her phone buzzed with a reminder, 1 hour until her meeting with the mysterious C at the veterans' shelter. First, though, she needed to pick up Amira from the observation facility. She closed the laptop, tucked it into her bag alongside the copy of The Little Prince, and headed for the door. At Meadowridge Elementary, Mrs. Tanner was holding court in the teacher's lounge, her voice carrying with self-importance. "I've scheduled all our parent speakers for Hero in the Classroom Week," she announced to her colleagues. "My brother David will be our most important guest. He's the regional manager at Sunrise Motors and has agreed to talk about business leadership." Mrs. Green, the fourth-grade teacher, nodded politely. "That sounds lovely, Helen." "I've had to make some adjustments to the schedule," Mrs. Tanner continued, a smug smile playing at her lips. "Some of our students seem to have difficulty understanding the difference between reality and fantasy." Mr. Patterson, the counselor, shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "Helen, about the Williams girl, I'm having second thoughts about that CPS report." Mrs. Tanner waved a dismissive hand. "Please. The child needs professional help, and clearly the mother is enabling these delusions. I heard they took her for overnight observation. It's for the best." What Mrs. Tanner didn't know was that Jace Bennett was crouched in the hallway just outside the lounge door, his phone recording every word. He'd arrived early specifically for this purpose, having overheard Mrs. Tanner mention her morning coffee, routine to another teacher. His hands trembled slightly as he stopped the recording and tucked the phone into his pocket. Gathering his courage, he made his way to the cafeteria where Mr. Clevin was usually finishing his early morning cleaning shift. Sure enough, the janitor was there, wiping down tables before the breakfast crowd arrived. Jace approached hesitantly. "Mr. Clevan?" The older man looked up, his expression softening when he saw the boy. "Morning, Jace. You're here early." Jace fumbled with his lunchbox, unzipping it to reveal a small voice recorder nestled inside. "I have something you might want to hear." He pressed play, and Mrs. Tanner's voice filled the quiet cafeteria, her words about Amira and these people crystal clear. Mr. Cleven's face darkened as he listened. When the recording ended, he carefully took the device from Jace's hand. "You did good, son," he said quietly. "Real good. Leave this with me." As Jace hurried off to class, Clevan connected the recorder to the ancient computer in the maintenance office. Within minutes, he had forwarded the audio file to an anonymous email address, copying the school board and superintendent. The message contained only the recording and a brief note. "This is how Mrs. Helen Tanner speaks about her third-grade students. Consider whether this represents our district's values." Later that morning, bright-colored flyers appeared on classroom bulletin boards throughout the school. Hero in the Classroom Week was printed across the top in bold letters, followed by a schedule of parent speakers. Near the bottom, in the Thursday slot, Amira Williams, TBD, had been crossed out in red ink. A small note at the bottom of the page stated clearly, "Last-minute cancellations not welcome." Billy Parker noticed it first when he returned from the bathroom. "Look," he said, pointing to the flyer. Mrs. Tanner crossed out Amira's made-up dad. Several children laughed, but Jace, from his corner seat, spoke up. Maybe he's real. Maybe you just don't know." Mrs. Tanner, overhearing, fixed Jace with a cool stare. "That's enough, Jace. Let's not encourage fantasies." Meanwhile, across town, the black SUV that had been conducting surveillance on Amira was no longer alone. It had become part of a small convoy, 3 nondescript vehicles moving in loose formation through the city. Inside the lead car sat Victor Karpin, now sporting a bruise where he'd been struck during the break-in. His cold eyes scanned a tablet displaying surveillance photos of Meadowridge Elementary. "We have confirmation the girl is being released from observation this morning," reported the driver, a man with a faint Eastern European accent. "The mother is en route to collect her now." Victor nodded. "And the school? Thursday is their special event. All parents and students will be gathered in one location." A thin smile crossed Victor's face. "Perfect. The girl knows something she shouldn't. A code, a location, something Williams encrypted into her memory." He tapped the screen, zooming in on Amira's school photo. Children are excellent vessels for information. They remember what they're told, especially when it's disguised as bedtime stories. At the Children's Behavioral Health Center, Nadine was completing discharge paperwork while Amira sat silently in a nearby chair, her small backpack clutched in her lap. Dr. Freeman approached, her clipboard in hand. "Ms. Williams, I'd like to discuss Amira's evaluation before you leave." Nadine's expression hardened. "Is there anything in your evaluation that explains why a child would be taken from her home based on a teacher's prejudice?" Dr. Freeman lowered her voice. "Actually, I have concerns about how this case was handled. The referral paperwork seemed unusual." She glanced around to ensure they weren't overheard. "A young CPS worker named Julia has been asking questions about the authorization. She said she was pressured to file the report." Instead of heading home, Nadine drove to a small coffee shop several blocks from the veterans' shelter. She needed to assess the situation before the meeting with C. While Amira sipped hot chocolate, Nadine made a call to her sister Lita. "I need you to take Amira for a few hours," she explained, keeping her voice low. "Something's happening and I don't want her with me until I know it's safe." 20 minutes later, Lita arrived. After giving Amira a tight hug and making her promise to stay with her aunt, Nadine watched them drive away before heading to the veterans' shelter alone. The shelter was housed in a converted warehouse, its brick exterior weathered but well-maintained. A simple sign reading Veterans Haven hung above the entrance. Nadine approached cautiously, scanning the street for any sign of surveillance. Inside, a dozen or so men and women of various ages sat in a common area, some playing cards, others reading or watching television. A tall, broad-shouldered black man with salt and pepper hair approached her. "Ms. Williams?" he asked, his voice low and gravelly. "I'm Major Brooks. Let's talk somewhere private." He led her to a small office at the back of the building. Once the door closed, his formal demeanor softened slightly. "Elijah and I served together for 15 years, he explained. "He saved my life in Kandahar, and I never got the chance to return the favor." Brooks gestured to a chair. "Until now." "You know where he is?" Nadine asked, desperate for answers. "I know what he's doing, and I know he's coming for you and Amira." Brooks pulled out a map of the city and spread it on the desk. "Elijah contacted me through secure channels yesterday. He's initiating an extraction protocol, getting you both to safety." "Extraction? Like we're behind enemy lines?" "In a manner of speaking, you are." Brooks's expression was grim. Victor Karpin is former Russian intelligence, now working as a freelance operative for the highest bidder. If he's after Amira, it's because she knows something valuable. Nadine thought of the flash drive, the encrypted files. "The bedtime stories," she murmured. Brooks looked up sharply. "What about them?" "Elijah always told Amira the same stories the same way every time. She could recite them word for word." Nadine's eyes widened with realization. Could he have encoded information in them, used them as some kind of mnemonic device? "It's exactly the kind of thing Elijah would do," Brooks nodded. "Create a human safeguard that no one would suspect, a child's memory." "So what's the plan?" Nadine asked, her protective instincts kicking into high gear. Brooks pointed to the map. "If Elijah's following standard protocol, he'll want to extract you both from an open area with multiple access routes and minimal civilian presence." His finger tapped a location on the map. The school playground would be ideal, especially if there's an event that would draw you both there naturally. Hero in the classroom week, Nadine whispered. Thursday. Then that's when he'll come. Brooke straightened up. I'll be on the ground coordinating. Cleveland's already in position at the school. The janitor? Nadine asked, surprised. Former Air Force pararescue, one of the best. Brooks's mouth quirked in a half-smile. We tend to keep an eye on our own. As they finalized details, Nadine felt a strange mix of fear and hope. After months of uncertainty, Elijah was coming home. Not through the front door with a duffel bag slung over his shoulder, but in a military helicopter on a rescue mission. That night, Nadine tucked Amira into bed in their home, having retrieved her from Lita's apartment. The house felt different now, no longer simply a home, but a temporary waypoint on their journey to somewhere else. Amira seemed to sense it too, her eyes alert despite the late hour. Mom, she said as Nadine smoothed her blankets. Can you tell me the star story? The one Dad always tells? Nadine sat on the edge of the bed. Which one, sweetie? The one about the 7 stars that make a map. Amira's voice was earnest. He said if I ever got lost, I could follow them home. Nadine felt a chill run down her spine. 7 points on a map, just like the coordinates she'd seen in the encrypted file. I don't think I know that one exactly the way Daddy tells it. That's okay, Amira said solemnly. I remember. He said it's the most important story to keep in my heart. As Amira drifted to sleep, still clutching her walkie-talkie, Nadine returned to the kitchen and opened the copy of The Little Prince. Once more. This time she looked at it with new eyes, not just as a book, but as a key to a code that might be locked in her daughter's memory. In the darkness outside, the old oak tree at the edge of their yard cast long shadows across the lawn. Among those shadows a figure moved, not Victor or his men, but a different watcher. Major Brooks settled into his surveillance position, his military training evident in his stillness. He would stand guard tonight, ensuring nothing happened to the Williams family before Elijah could reach them. At 3 a.m., Amira's walkie-talkie crackled with static, waking her from a light sleep. A garbled voice came through, deliberately distorted but still recognizable to her ears. Touchdown T-minus 10 hours. Look up, baby girl. Amira smiled in the darkness, hugging the toy to her chest. Her father was coming, just as he'd promised. All she had to do was wait. 200 miles away, flying low enough to avoid radar detection, Captain Elijah Williams guided his modified stealth helicopter through the night. The aircraft was cutting-edge technology, an experimental model designed for clandestine operations in hostile territory. Now that territory was his own country, and the hostiles were the very people he'd once worked alongside. He checked the secure communication system, confirming that the coded message had been transmitted to Amira's receiver. It wasn't much, but he needed her to be ready, because tomorrow, everything would change. Thursday morning dawned clear and bright, perfect weather for Meadowridge Elementary's hero in the classroom week. Excitement bubbled through the hallways as students arrived with their parents in tow. Professional attire and uniforms were everywhere. A doctor in a white coat, a firefighter in turnout gear, a police officer with a carefully secured sidearm. Mrs. Tanner stood at the entrance to the auditorium, greeting each family with a practiced smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Welcome. Please sign in and take a seat. We'll begin in 15 minutes. Inside, rows of chairs faced a small stage where a podium had been set up. Parents chatted among themselves while children fidgeted, eager to show off their family members. A lawyer in an expensive suit checked her watch. A banker straightened his tie. A firefighter adjusted his heavy jacket, already sweating under the auditorium lights. Amira sat alone in the front row, exactly where Mrs. Tanner had placed her. Her yellow dress was crisp and neat, her hair pulled back in the same 2 puffs, each secured with yellow ribbons that matched her outfit. She looked calm, almost eerily so, her hands folded in her lap as she waited. Mrs. Tanner approached, bending slightly to bring her face level with Amira's. Guess Dad got stuck in traffic, huh? She whispered, her smile sharp with satisfied cruelty. Amira met her gaze steadily. "He's coming." Mrs. Tanner straightened with a small scoff and returned to the entrance to greet more families. Nadine had dropped Amira off earlier, explaining that she needed to run an errand but would be back before Amira's scheduled time slot. What she didn't tell her daughter was that she was meeting Major Brooks and Mr. Cleven one last time to confirm the extraction plan. One by one, students walked to the podium with their parents. Tommy Anderson beamed with pride as his dentist. Mother showed x-rays of healthy versus decayed teeth. Rachel Turner's father explained how accountants help businesses manage their money. The presentations continued, each child glowing with the simple joy of sharing someone they admired. Throughout it all, Amira's chair remained conspicuously empty beside her. Mrs. Tanner made a point of looking at it periodically, as if to emphasize the absence. Meanwhile, Mr. Cleven moved through the building, dressed not in his usual maintenance coveralls but in a crisp janitor's uniform. He pushed his mop methodically across the floor near the emergency exit, pausing occasionally to check his watch. Under the bleachers at the back of the auditorium, he quickly installed a small black device, a transponder that would transmit the building's exact coordinates to an incoming aircraft. Using the mop handle, he tapped out a pattern against the floor, a code that would have been recognizable to anyone with military training. From across the room, Major Brooks, disguised in a security guard uniform borrowed from the shelter, caught his eye and nodded almost imperceptibly. Outside the school, the small convoy of unmarked vehicles pulled into visitor parking spaces. Victor Carpin adjusted his tie and clipped a fake security badge to his jacket pocket. Guest security, it read, alongside a company logo that didn't exist. Remember, he instructed his team via a nearly invisible earpiece, the girl is the primary target. The flash drive contents are incomplete without the information in her head. He entered the school through a side door, nodding professionally to a teacher who passed by. His earpiece crackled with static, then cleared. Visual on target. Proceeding to Phase 2. In the auditorium, Mrs. Tanner consulted her schedule. Next up, we have Kyle Brooks's father, who will tell us about being a structural engineer. As Kyle and his father took the stage, Amira quietly stood up and slipped out the side door. The weight of the empty chair beside her, the pitying glances from other parents, Mrs. Tanner's satisfied smirk. It was all too much. She made her way outside to the playground, her special place where she often sat to draw during recess. The playground was deserted, everyone being at the assembly. Amira climbed to the top of the jungle gym, her favorite spot. From here, she could see beyond the school grounds to the hills in the distance. Her fingers closed around the walkie-talkie in her pocket. She pulled it out, pressing it to her ear, as if listening for messages. The first vibration was so subtle that Amira thought she had imagined it, but then it came again, a deep, rhythmic tremor that she felt through the metal bars of the jungle gym. Thump, thump, thump. The sound grew louder, more insistent, a heartbeat in the sky. Inside the auditorium, conversations faltered as the building began to shake slightly. Water in a glass on the podium rippled. The lights flickered once, twice. "Is that an earthquake?" someone called out. Mrs. Tanner looked alarmed. Everyone remained calm. "I'm sure it's just..." The noise was unmistakable now. A thunderous beating that drowned out all other sounds. Windows trembled in their frames. Papers fluttered off desks. The entire assembly rose as one, confusion and alarm spreading through the crowd. "What is that?" Mrs. Tanner's voice rose to a near scream. Parents and children streamed toward the exits, pouring out onto the school grounds. Teachers tried to maintain order, but curiosity overcame protocol as everyone rushed to locate the source of the noise. They found Amira standing calmly in the middle of the playground, her face upturned, a smile spreading across her features as the shadow fell over her. Descending from the sky was a massive matte black helicopter, unlike anything most of them had ever seen. Its design was angular, almost otherworldly, clearly built for stealth rather than conventional transport. The sound of its rotors sent papers and loose debris flying as it lowered itself toward the open space of the playground. "Oh my God," Mrs. Green whispered, clutching Mr. Patterson's arm. "It's real." Mrs. Tanner stood frozen, her mouth open in shock. Around her, students pointed and shouted, some covering their ears against the noise, others recording with cell phones. Parents pulled their children close, unsure if they were witnessing something miraculous or dangerous. "I told you he'd come," Amira said to no one in particular, her voice lost in the roar but her satisfaction clear on her face. The helicopter hovered 20 feet above the ground, its side door sliding open to reveal a figure in tactical gear. Captain Elijah Williams stood framed in the doorway, his helmet in one hand, his face serious but determined. With practiced ease, he secured a line and rappelled down to the ground, his boots landing with a soft thud on the asphalt. A hushed silence fell over the crowd as Elijah removed his tactical gloves and knelt down, opening his arms. Amira ran to him without hesitation, launching herself into his embrace. He lifted her easily, holding her tight against his chest as she wrapped her small arms around his neck. "You came," she whispered into his ear. "I promised, didn't I?" Elijah replied, his voice rough with emotion. Cameras flashed as parents captured the moment. Children stood wide-eyed and open-mouthed. Teachers exchanged glances of disbelief, and in some cases, shame. Mrs. Tanner had recovered enough to push her way to the front of the crowd. This is completely inappropriate. You can't just land a helicopter at a school. This is..." Her words died in her throat as Major Brooks appeared beside her, his security guard disguise discarded to reveal tactical gear similar to Elijah's. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to step back. This is a federal security operation." From the back of the crowd, Victor Carpin watched the scene unfold with cold calculation. His hand moved to the inside of his jacket, where a silenced pistol waited. Slowly, he began to work his way closer to Elijah and Amira, his movements casual, but purposeful. As Elijah lowered Amira to the ground, keeping one protective hand on her shoulder, Victor saw his opportunity. He raised the concealed weapon, aiming carefully. Bam! The sound of a body hitting the pavement cut through the helicopter's diminishing roar. Major Brooks had spotted Victor from the corner of his eye and reacted with the speed of a career soldier, tackling the man to the ground. The gun skittered across the asphalt. In one smooth motion, Mr. Cleveland emerged from the crowd and kicked the weapon away, his foot coming down on Victor's wrist with precisely enough force to immobilize without breaking. "Stay down," Cleveland growled, any trace of the unassuming school janitor gone from his voice. Chaos erupted as parents pulled their children back, teachers herded students toward the building, and several undercover agents, previously stationed around the perimeter, converged on Victor's fallen associates. Through it all, Elijah remained focused on Amira. He knelt before her again, his hands on her shoulders. "I need you to come with me now. It's not safe here anymore." Amira nodded solemnly. "What about Mom? She'll meet us at the safe point." Elijah looked up, scanning the crowd until he spotted Nadine pushing her way through. Their eyes met across the distance, relief, love, and determination passing between them in a silent exchange. Elijah lifted Amira into his arms and carried her toward the helicopter. As he reached the rope ladder, he paused and turned back to face the crowd. His eyes found Mrs. Tanner, who stood trembling at the front. "Next time," he said, his voice carrying despite the noise, "believe a child when she speaks." With that, he secured Amira in the helicopter's cockpit, climbed in after her, and signaled to the pilot. The massive machine lifted higher, its rotors kicking up a final gust that sent papers and hats flying in all directions. As the helicopter banked and turned toward the mountains, the stunned crowd below remained frozen in place, trying to process what they had just witnessed. Parents hugged their children, teachers whispered among themselves, and Mrs. Tanner stood alone, her face ashen, her worldview shattered beyond repair. Major Brooks approached her, his expression stern. "Mrs. Tanner, we'll need to speak with you about your involvement in endangering a military family." In the helicopter, Amira pressed her face to the window, watching her school grow smaller below. Beside her, Elijah adjusted his headset and began transmitting coordinates to a secure location. "Daddy?" Amira asked, her voice small against the engine's hum. "Yes, Starlight. Will we come back?" Elijah glanced at her, then back at the horizon stretching before them. Not for a while, but someday when it's safe. He reached over and took her hand. I'm sorry I had to stay away so long. It's okay, Amira said, squeezing his fingers. I knew you'd come back. I just wish they had believed me. As the helicopter disappeared into the distance, the world below was already changing. News vans began arriving at the school. Police cordoned off the area, and the story of the girl nobody believed, and the father who landed a helicopter to save her, was already spreading like wildfire through phone calls, text messages, and social media. The truth, so long denied, had finally roared from the sky. By nightfall, the story had exploded across news outlets nationwide. Helicopter footage of Meadowridge Elementary played on repeat on every channel, showing the dramatic landing and extraction from multiple angles captured by parents' cell phones. Black helicopter lands at elementary school. Pilot rescues daughter. From assassins? Screamed the headline on the evening news. Social media platforms were flooded with shaky videos and wild theories. Conspiracy forums went into overdrive, with users claiming everything from alien intervention to secret government programs. Meanwhile, federal agents had cordoned off the school grounds, establishing a perimeter and debriefing witnesses. Official statements were conspicuously absent, with government agencies maintaining radio silence on the incident, which only fueled further speculation. In a secure location 50 miles outside the city, Amira Williams paced the floor of a military safe house. She'd been escorted here directly after the helicopter departed, whisked away in an unmarked SUV before reporters could identify her. Now she waited anxiously for news of Elijah and Amira. The door opened, and Major Brooks entered, looking exhausted, but satisfied. They're safe, he said simply. ETA 20 minutes. Nadine collapsed into a chair, relief washing over her in waves. Thank God. What happens now? Debriefing. Relocation. Brooks poured himself a cup of coffee from a pot in the corner. And a whole lot of explaining to certain people who thought they could use your family as pawns. Victor Carpin? In custody, along with 3 of his associates. The rest scattered when they realized their cover was blown. Brooks took a long sip of his coffee. He's already talking, hoping for a deal. Before Nadine could ask more questions, the distant sound of helicopter. Blades cut through the night. Minutes later, the door burst open and Amira ran in, flinging herself into her mother's arms. Elijah followed, still in his tactical gear, but with his helmet removed, revealing exhausted eyes and several days' worth of stubble. For a long moment, the family simply held each other, reunited at last after months of separation and days of terror. No words were necessary, just the solid reality of being together again. Back in the city, the Meadowridge School Board had convened an emergency session, summoned from dinner tables and evening plans to address the unprecedented situation. The district superintendent, Dr. Sharon Coleman, presided over the hastily assembled gathering, her expression grave. I've just received word that Mrs. Tanner has been taken in for questioning by federal agents, she informed the stunned board members. This goes far beyond a simple misunderstanding. It appears her actions may have endangered a military family under protection. Protection from what? Asked one board member. Dr. Coleman shook her head. They won't tell us. National security. But that's not our immediate concern. She slid a tablet across the table. This recording was anonymously submitted to every board member this morning. I suggest you listen. She pressed play, and Mrs. Tanner's voice filled the room. The child's clearly disturbed. These people always reach for glory because they have so little of it. The recording continued, revealing a pattern of prejudice that left the board members shifting uncomfortably in their seats. There's more, Dr. Coleman said grimly. Multiple recordings, going back weeks, and statements from other staff members about her treatment of Amira Williams and other minority students. By unanimous vote, Mrs. Tanner was immediately suspended pending a full investigation, with termination proceedings to follow. The next morning, Nadine sat at a table in the safe house, a cup of coffee cooling before her as she faced a federal agent named Director Harlow, a stern woman with steel-gray hair pulled back in a tight bun. "Mrs. Williams, I want to apologize on behalf of the United States government for what your family has endured," Harlow began, her tone formal but sincere. "Your husband's work is of the highest national importance, which is why we were alarmed when we learned of the school's actions and the attention they brought to your daughter." "What exactly is my husband's work?" Nadine asked directly. "I know it's more than flying helicopters." Harlow exchanged a glance with Elijah, who nodded, slightly. "Captain Williams leads an elite extraction team," she explained. "They specialize in rescuing high-value assets from hostile territories, primarily children with parents who possess critical intelligence or skills needed by the United States." Nadine's eyes widened. "He rescues children?" "Among others," Harlow confirmed. "His team has extracted over 24 children from war zones and hostile regimes in the past 3 years alone. Children whose parents were scientists, intelligence officers, or dissidents with valuable information." Elijah reached across the table, taking Nadine's hand. "I couldn't tell you the full scope. It was too dangerous, for you and for Amira." "But why target Amira?" Nadine asked, struggling to understand. "What could she possibly know?" Harlow slid a file across the table. Inside was a photograph of a young girl, perhaps 7 or 8, with solemn eyes and dark hair. "This is Mariam Hafiz. Her father was a nuclear physicist who defected from his country with critical information about their weapons program. During the extraction, Dr. Hafiz was killed, but not before entrusting Captain Williams with encrypted data, vital to national security. The extraction was compromised," Elijah continued, his voice heavy with the memory. "We were under heavy fire. There was no way to transport the data securely across the border. Every electronic device was being scanned. So I memorized the key elements and encoded them." "In bedtime stories," Nadine finished, understanding dawning. "Stories you told Amira." Elijah nodded. "Children remember patterns, sequences, stories. Amira has a photographic memory, you know, that. She could recite those stories word for word exactly as I told them. Inside those stories were coded coordinates, access protocols, names." "The Little Prince," Nadine murmured, remembering the hollowed-out book. "A backup system," Elijah confirmed, "but incomplete without the verbal keys in the stories." A knock at the door interrupted them. Major Brooks entered, accompanied by Amira, who had been drawing in the next room. She rushed to her father's side, climbing into his lap as naturally as if they'd never been separated. "They want me to do an interview," Amira announced, showing them a drawing she'd made of a helicopter above a school. "About what happened?" Harlow leaned forward. "Actually, Amira, that might not be a bad idea. Controlled narrative, on our terms." And so 3 days later, Amira found herself sitting in a brightly lit studio of a popular children's educational show. Her yellow dress replaced with a new blue one, but her hair still in the same neat puff secured with matching ribbons. "So, Amira," said the friendly host, "that was quite an entrance your dad made at your school. Were you scared when the helicopter landed?" Amira shook her head, smiling shyly. "No, I knew he was coming." "And what do you want to be when you grow up? A helicopter pilot like your dad?" Amira's eyes sparkled as she glanced at Elijah, who stood just off camera. "I want to fly higher than him, maybe rescue him next time." The audience chuckled, charmed by her confidence. What they didn't know, what almost no one knew, was that this carefully orchestrated interview was part of a larger strategy to normalize the event, to transform it from potential national security incident to heartwarming human interest story. Back at the safe house that evening, Nadine sat cross-legged on the floor, the contents of the flash drive from The Little Prince now decrypted and spread before her. With proper authorization codes provided by Director Harlow, the files had unlocked, revealing the full truth of Elijah's missions. "You weren't just a pilot," she whispered, looking up at her husband. "You've been smuggling out children from war zones for years." Elijah nodded, his expression solemn. "Children with parents who had vital intelligence. Children who would have been used as leverage, tortured, killed. He gestured to the files. That drive contains the coordinates to hidden safe houses across 3 continents, places where these families can disappear until they can be safely integrated elsewhere. And Amira had unknowingly been part of a protective network all along. Elijah's voice filled with pride. Every time she recited those bedtime stories, she was keeping those routes secure. Victor's people knew the data was incomplete without her, without the verbal keys I'd encoded in stories only she knew. In a federal detention center across town, Victor Carpin sat across from 2 agents, his confidence eroded, but not entirely gone. He leaned forward, handcuffs clinking against the metal table. "She's the last key," he said, his accent more pronounced under stress. "The only memory left." He imprinted data inside her stories. "Who are you working for, Victor?" one agent asked. Victor's smile was thin. "The highest bidder. Those safe houses. Williams established? They contain assets worth millions to certain governments. The girl's memories are the only map to finding them." Meanwhile, in a quiet moment before bed, Elijah sat on the edge of Amira's temporary bed in the safe house. For the first time in months, he was there to tuck her in properly. "Daddy," Amira said, her voice small in the dimly lit room. "Why did you always tell me those same stories the same way every time, even when I asked for different ones?" Elijah brushed a strand of hair from her forehead. "Because you were the only one I could trust to remember them exactly," he said softly. "You were keeping people safe, Starlight. People like us, with children like you." Amira's eyes widened with understanding. "Is that why Mrs. Tanner didn't believe me? Because it was supposed to be a secret?" "No, sweetheart," Elijah said firmly. "Mrs. Tanner didn't believe you because sometimes adults forget how to see the truth. They make up their minds about people before they really know them." "Because we're black?" Amira asked bluntly, with the directness only a child could manage. Elijah didn't shy away from the question. "That was part of it. But you proved her wrong. You stayed strong, and you never stopped believing, even when no one else did." As Amira drifted off to sleep, Nadine appeared in the doorway, watching the tender scene with tears in her eyes. She and Elijah had a long road ahead: debriefings, relocation, building a new life somewhere safer. But for now, with her family, reunited, everything else could wait. 2 weeks later, the Williams family arrived at their new home, a modest but comfortable house near the coast, far from their old life at Meadowridge. Amira would start at a new school after the winter break, giving her time to adjust to their new surroundings and the aftermath of everything that had happened. As they unloaded boxes from the moving truck, Amira spotted a girl about her age watching curiously from the house next door. The girl waved hesitantly. "Can I go say hi?" Amira asked her parents. Nadine and Elijah exchanged glances, then nodded. As Amira ran across the lawn to introduce herself, Elijah put his arm around Nadine's shoulders. "Think she'll tell her new friends what her dad does for a living?" he asked with a small smile. Nadine leaned into his embrace, watching their daughter begin again with the simple courage that had carried her through so much. "Probably," she replied. "But this time, they'll believe her." 6 months after the helicopter landing that changed everything, Mr. Cleveland stood on a stage in Washington, D.C., uncomfortable in a suit that felt too stiff compared to his customary coveralls. Before him stretched a sea of faces, officials, military personnel, and television cameras capturing the moment for the evening news. For extraordinary courage in the face of danger, and for actions that directly contributed to national security, we award Raymond Cleveland the National Civilian Medal of Honor, announced the presenter, draping a blue ribbon holding a gold medallion around his neck. When offered the microphone for a speech, Cleveland cleared his throat awkwardly. "I'm not one for fancy words," he began, his deep voice carrying across the hushed audience. "Just want to say one thing. Never overlook janitors. We clean more than floors." The audience erupted in laughter and applause, unaware of how literally true his statement was. Cleveland had spent 20 years in Air Force pararescue before retiring to a strategic position as a school janitor, part of a network of former military personnel who maintained watchful eyes in civilian settings. In the audience, Major Brooks watched with pride. Following the Williams case, he had been offered reinstatement to his former military rank with full honors and back pay. The letter had sat on his desk for weeks before he finally made his decision. "I appreciate the offer, Director," he told Harlow when they met, "but I've found my calling elsewhere." Instead of returning to active duty, Brooks had leased a small airfield outside the city. There, with funding from anonymous government sources, he established the Williams Flight Academy for Youth, a program designed to introduce underprivileged children to aviation, with a special focus on military families. The Academy's logo featured a stylized helicopter silhouette with a star positioned to the right of the tail rotor, a subtle nod to Elijah's nickname for Amira. Within months, it had a waiting list of eager young students dreaming of taking to the skies. Mrs. Tanner's story took a very different turn. Following her suspension, she hired an attorney and filed a defamation lawsuit against the school district, claiming she had been unfairly targeted and that the recordings had been manipulated. Her case fell apart during the first hearing when her attorney played the full recordings in an attempt to show they had been taken out of context. Instead, they revealed even more damning statements. The judge dismissed her case with prejudice. The final blow came when a daytime talk show aired a special segment titled "Classroom Bias: When Teachers Fail Our Children." The producers had obtained permission to use portions of the recordings, with Mrs. Tanner's voice disguised but her words intact. The public reaction was swift and unforgiving. Former colleagues crossed the street to avoid her. Invitations to social events dried up. Even her brother, the car salesman she had so proudly invited to Career Day, asked her not to visit his dealership anymore, concerned about the impact on his business. 3 months after the helicopter incident, Jace Bennett received devastating news. His mother, who had been battling cancer for years, passed away quietly in her sleep. With no other family to take him in, he faced placement in the foster system. Word reached Nadine through Mr. Clevin, who had maintained discreet contact with several families from Meadowridge. Without hesitation, she and Elijah flew back for the funeral, where they approached the social worker handling Jace's case. "We'd like to apply to become Jace's guardians," Nadine said, her hand resting supportively on the boy's thin shoulder. He was a true friend to Amira when no one else would be. The process wasn't simple. Background checks, home studies, and court appearances filled the next several months. But by spring, the paperwork was finalized, and Jace moved into the bedroom, across the hall from Amira's in their coastal home. "Now I have a brother," Amira told her new teacher proudly during a family introduction project. Her stutter, once a source of shame, had become barely noticeable in the supportive environment of his new home. Back at Child Protective Services, the young worker named Julia, who had questioned Amira's case, found herself summoned to the director's office. Expecting a reprimand for her previous inquiries, she was stunned to be offered a promotion instead. "Your willingness to question procedures potentially influenced by bias impressed some very important people," her supervisor explained. "We're establishing a new program to review our case management protocols for cultural and racial bias, and we'd like you to lead it." The program, quietly backed by federal funding, would eventually be named the Amira Protocol in internal documents, a reference few would understand, but which symbolized a significant shift in how the agency approached cases involving minority families. On weekends when the weather was good, Elijah would take Amira and Jace flying in a small civilian helicopter he'd purchased. Unlike his military aircraft, this one was bright blue with a yellow stripe, Amira's choice. She proudly wore her own small headset, learning to call out coordinates and understand flight patterns. "When can I actually fly it?" she asked regularly. "When your feet can reach the pedals," Elijah always answered with a laugh. But he never discouraged her, teaching her everything about aviation that her young mind could absorb. During one such weekend excursion, they landed in a small town 3 hours from their home. There, nestled between a cafe and a hardware store, stood a quaint bookshop with no sign and windows obscured by stacks of books. Elijah led the children inside, exchanging a complex handshake with the elderly proprietor, who led them to a back room filled with rare editions. "I have what you asked for," the old man said, retrieving a worn copy of The Little Prince from a locked cabinet. First edition, as requested. Amira opened it carefully, her eyes widening when she found a handwritten note tucked between the pages. The childish handwriting read, "Thank you for the stars that showed me home." There was no signature, just a small drawing of a helicopter. "Who wrote this?" Amira asked, looking up at her father. "Someone like you," Elijah replied softly. "A child I brought home once long ago. There are many such children scattered across the world now, growing up safe because of people who believed in something bigger than themselves, 4 years after." The helicopter landing, Elijah officially retired from military service. The ceremony was small but dignified, attended by only those with the highest security clearances. When called upon to speak, Elijah stood tall in his dress uniform, medals gleaming on his chest. "I've flown missions on every continent," he said, his deep voice carrying across the room. "I've extracted assets deemed vital to national security, from the most hostile territories on Earth. But my greatest rescue—" He paused, emotion threatening to overcome his composure. "Was my daughter's voice, her truth, which almost got silenced by those who refused to believe." That same year, Amira, now 12, gave a presentation at her new school titled, "My Hero Doesn't Wear a Cape, He Wears Wings." She stood confidently before her classmates, displaying photographs of her father beside various helicopters, his service medals, and news clippings about the day he landed at Meadowridge Elementary. "Some heroes save the day in ways everyone can see," she concluded. "Others work in silence behind the scenes, but they're heroes just the same." Her teacher, Mrs. Roberts, applauded enthusiastically. "That was wonderful, Amira. You must be very proud of your father." "I am," Amira replied, smiling. "And he's proud of me, too." The memory of Mrs. Tanner's dismissive words had faded, replaced by the confidence that comes from being believed. Jace, sitting in the front row, gave her a thumbs up. His stutter now appeared only when he was extremely nervous, and he had developed a talent for photography, documenting their family's journey with an artist's eye for detail. 6 years later, an 18-year-old Amira Williams stood on a tarmac, flight helmet tucked under her arm, her Air Force Academy uniform crisp in the morning sun. She had followed in her father's footsteps but charted her own course, focusing on search and rescue operations rather than covert missions. As she prepared for her first solo cross-country flight, she noticed a small group gathered at the edge of the airfield. Her parents, Jace with his ever-present camera, Major Brooks and Mr. Cleven, now stooped with age but still standing tall with military bearing. Amira saluted them before climbing into the cockpit of her training jet. As she soared into the clear blue sky, she dipped her wing in a gesture her father had taught her years ago, a pilot's salute to those watching from below. On the ground below, at a nearby elementary school, a young teacher led her 3rd grade class outside to watch the jet streak overhead. One little girl pointed excitedly at the sky. "My mom flies planes like that," she announced proudly. "She's in the Air Force." The teacher laughed skeptically. "That's quite an imagination you have, Sarah." Just then, as if in direct response, the jet executed a perfect barrel roll above them, leaving a trail of white vapor that caught the sunlight like a strand of pearls across the sky. The teacher's laughter died in her throat as the other children gasped in delight. Sarah smiled knowingly, watching the aircraft disappear into the distance. "Sometimes," she said quietly, echoing words her mother had taught her, "kids don't lie. Sometimes they just dream higher than you can see." What assumptions do we make about children, and how often does our own prejudice blind us to their truth? Amira's story reminds us that sometimes those we dismiss may carry the most extraordinary realities within them. If this story touched your heart, like and subscribe for more powerful narratives that challenge our perceptions and celebrate unexpected heroes.